Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today, we explain Leviticus Chapter 2 in a clear and simple way, step by step. We're going to completely immerse ourselves in this fascinating ancient text. We're looking at exactly how a person could bring a very specific, beautiful kind of gift to the altar. There are actually no massive animal sacrifices in this chapter. Instead, we're zooming in on the simple, everyday plant-based ingredients of the ancient world. It is incredibly grounding, and honestly a lot more relatable than you might expect. Here's a quick look at our agenda for this explainer. We'll start with the context and the meal offering, then look at the uncooked flour offering, move into the baked, griddled, and fried options, discuss the strict rules of no leaven, only salt, look at the first fruits grain offering, and wrap it all up with some practical life lessons and a recap. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, Context and the Meal Offering. So to really grasp this chapter, we need just a little bit of context. If you look at the previous chapter of Leviticus, the text lays out all the rules for burnt offerings involving animals, bulls, sheep, goats, birds. But as soon as we open chapter 2, the focus shifts completely to the plant kingdom. In this explainer, we are strictly focusing on the plain meaning, what we call the pashat of the text. So let's look at verse 1. It reads, "And when anyone bringeth a meal offering unto the Lord, his offering shall be of fine flour, and he shall pour oil upon it and put frankincense thereon." Notice exactly how that verse begins, when anyone bringeth. Right away, this tells us this is a voluntary act. It's someone stepping forward entirely of their own free will to bring a gift. And the core ingredient here? Fine flour. Now we have to pause and think about this. This wasn't just rough grain swept straight off the threshing floor. Making fine flour in the ancient world required hours and hours of intense backbreaking labor. We're talking about grinding the wheat by hand, repeatedly sifting it over and over until literally only the softest, purest powder remained. It was the good stuff, prepared with immense, intentional care. And to this fine flour, the person is instructed to add two specific things. First, olive oil, which gives it this beautiful richness and moisture. And second, frankincense. That's a fragrant tree resin that, when it's burned, produces an incredibly sweet, beautiful aroma. And this brings us to a really crucial definition. This offering is called a meal offering, or in Hebrew, a minchah. The root of that word minchah essentially just means a gift or a tribute. Think about the contrast here. Unlike the animal sacrifices detailed in the previous chapter, which, let's be honest, could be prohibitively expensive for a poor family, this specific offering was highly accessible. A handful of fine flour, a little splash of olive oil, and some incense meant that even the common, everyday person could bring a beautiful, fragrant gift to the altar. It highlights a profound principle right out of the gate. It absolutely wasn't the material wealth of the offering that mattered most. It was the sincere intention and the effort of the person bringing it. Literally everyone had a way to participate. Moving right along to Section 2, the uncooked flour offering. Okay, so now we need to examine exactly what the priests do with this raw, uncooked offering of fine flour, oil, and incense. We see this in verses 2 and 3. The worshiper has done the hard work of preparing the ingredients, right? But they can't just walk up to the altar themselves. They need a mediator. So let's walk through the exact procedure. The person brings the offering to Aaron's sons, who are the designated priests. Then, the priest performs a very specific, highly deliberate action. He reaches right into the mixture and takes exactly one handful of the fine flour and oil, making absolute sure to scoop up all of the frankincense. The priest then takes this single handful and makes it smoke upon the altar. The text explicitly calls this an offering made by fire of a sweet savor unto the Lord. But you're probably wondering, what happens to the rest of the flour and oil? Well, verse 3 tells us clearly, "But that which is left of the meal offering shall be Aaron's and his sons. It is a thing most holy of the offerings of the Lord made by fire." So the bulk of the offering isn't destroyed at all. It's actually given to the priests to eat. It is designated as most holy, which simply means it can only be eaten by the priests themselves and only within the holy boundaries of the sanctuary. Now, here's what's truly fascinating. Let's look at the specific term used for that single burned handful. The text calls it the memorial part, or in Hebrew, the Azkarah. This word comes from a Hebrew root meaning to remember. And this is just a beautiful concept. That single handful acts as a physical representation of the entire offering. Even though only a tiny portion actually goes up in smoke on the altar, it serves as a memorial. It ensures that the entirety of the worshiper's gift is remembered and accepted. The fire consumes the memorial portion as a sweet savor, while the rest of it practically sustains the priests who have dedicated their entire lives to serving in the sanctuary. It's a perfect balance. Let's look at Section 3, baked, griddled, and fried. So, as we move into verses 4 through 10, the text transitions from raw, uncooked flour to cooked meal offerings. Because, not everyone brought raw flour. Some people prepared it at home first. And the text provides 3 very practical, everyday preparation methods. Let's break them down. First up, in verse 4, we have the oven. If a person bakes their offering, it absolutely must be unleavened. It can take the form of thick cakes of fine flour mingled with oil, or thin, flat wafers that just have oil spread over them. Second, in verses 5 and 6, we have the griddle. This was a flat pan used over an open fire. If it's prepared this way, the unleavened fine flour is mixed with oil, cooked completely flat, and then the text specifically commands the worshiper to break it in pieces and pour oil thereon. Finally, in verse 7, what if the offering is prepared in a stewing pan? Well, yes, the ancient Israelites essentially had a method for deep frying their offerings. It is again made of fine flour cooked in a deeper pan with oil. So whether it's baked in a clay oven, prepared on a flat metal griddle and crumbled up, or fried in a deeper pan, the offering always relies on the exact same simple everyday ingredients: fine flour and oil. Now, verses 8 and 9 explain what happens when the worshiper brings these pre-cooked items to the sanctuary. Notice how the process perfectly mirrors the raw flour offering we literally just talked about. The cooked items are presented to the priest, who brings them right up to the altar. Then, as verse 9 tells us, the priest takes off the memorial part from the cooked meal offering. He might pinch off a piece of the baked cake or take a scoop of the crumbled griddle bread, and he makes it smoke upon the altar. Just like the raw flour, this cooked memorial portion is an offering made by fire, yielding a sweet savor. The exact same holy process is followed, regardless of how the flour and oil were prepped back at home. And just as before, verse 10 solidifies the rule for the leftovers. Whatever remains of those baked cakes, or the griddled pieces, or the fried flour after that memorial portion is burned, it all belongs to Aaron and his sons. To understand why this is so absolutely critical, we have to remember that the priests, who were from the tribe of Levi, were dedicated entirely to the sanctuary. They were not given traditional agricultural land to farm like all the other tribes were. Therefore, the crucial takeaway is that these offerings were dual purpose. Yes, they were a deeply spiritual gift directed toward God, ascending as smoke. But simultaneously, they were highly practical provision, a primary food source for the priests themselves. Section 4 is a really interesting one. No leaven, only salt. As we move into verses 11 through 13, the text introduces these fascinating and honestly incredibly strict rules about the chemistry of the offerings. It outlines explicitly what must never, ever be placed on the altar fire, and conversely, what must absolutely always be included. Let's look at this stark contrast. Verse 11 is a definitive negative command. It says, "No meal offering which ye shall bring unto the Lord shall be made with leaven, for ye shall make no leaven nor any honey, smoke as an offering made by fire unto the Lord." Leaven, which is yeast or sourdough starter, the stuff that causes dough to rise, expand, and ferment over time, is strictly forbidden from being burned on the altar. Similarly, honey. And in the ancient Near East, honey usually referred to thick, sweet fruit syrups, like date nectar, as well as regular bee honey. That is also completely banned from the altar fire. Why? Well, both leaven and honey are agents of change. They represent fermentation and sweet decay. They are simply not permitted to go up in smoke as a fire offering. But then verse 13 flips to a strict positive command. Every single grain offering must be seasoned with salt. Let's read this powerful commandment carefully together. "And every offering of thy meal offering shalt thou season with salt, neither shalt thou suffer the salt of the covenant of thy God to be lacking from thy meal offering. With all thine offerings thou shalt offer salt." So why salt? Well, think about it. Salt is the exact opposite of leaven and honey. Where yeast ferments and honey sours over time, salt preserves. It actively stops decay. Therefore, the text calls it the salt of the covenant. A covenant is a binding treaty. It's a relationship. By adding salt to every single offering, the worshiper is physically demonstrating that this relationship, this promise, is unbreakable, uncorrupted, and everlasting. It acts as a mandatory preserving element that anchors a simple, everyday flour offering in eternal significance. Now, before we move on, we have to clarify a really vital detail found in verse 12. While the text just explicitly forbade burning leaven and honey on the altar, verse 12 says, "As an offering of first fruits ye may bring them unto the Lord, but they shall not come up for a sweet savor on the altar." This establishes a very specific boundary. The Israelites absolutely could bring leavened bread or sweet honey to the sanctuary complex as a firstfruits offering. Those items would simply be given directly to the priests to eat, but they were strictly prohibited from ever placing those specific items onto the actual altar fire itself. The altar fire was reserved exclusively for the unleavened, the unfermented, and the salted. Okay, Section 5, the first fruits grain offering. Finally, we reach verses 14 through 16. The chapter concludes by describing one more distinct type of meal offering. This is a special grain offering made not from fine, aged flour, but from the very first harvest of the new season. Let's trace the steps for this one. When the earliest grain just begins to ripen, a person can bring a meal offering of their first fruits. But because it's fresh and green and moist, it can't simply be milled into fine flour yet. It just wouldn't work. Instead, the text instructs the worshiper to take the fresh, early grain, crush the heads into what we might call groats, basically coarsely crushed grain, and roast them in the fire to dry them out. Once they are roasted and crushed, the process becomes identical to the very first offering we studied. In verse 15, the worshiper puts oil and frankincense on it. Then, in verse 16, the priest takes that mixture, extracts the memorial portion of the crushed grain, oil, and incense, and burns it as an offering made by fire unto the Lord. The cycle of the chapter completes itself beautifully. And that brings us to our final section, life lessons and recap. Having walked step by step through the physical realities and the plain meaning of Leviticus Chapter 2, let's distill what these ancient practices can actually teach you today in your own life. First, think about accessibility. The fine flour offering teaches you that simple, accessible intentions matter deeply. You don't need to be incredibly wealthy or powerful to show gratitude or seek connection. Sometimes a simple handful of your earnest, sifted effort is more than enough. Second, practical provision. The fact that the bulk of the offering was most holy food for Aaron and his sons reminds us that communities must practically provide for those who dedicate their lives to service. It's a shared ecosystem. Third, lasting promises. The strict requirement of the salt of the covenant is such a powerful metaphor for you today. It tells you that your commitments, your relationships, and your promises shouldn't be subject to decay. They must be intentionally preserved with the enduring salt of loyalty and longevity. And finally, the first fruits. Roasting the very first green ears of grain teaches you not to wait until you have a massive, comfortable surplus to show gratitude. It challenges you to give your earliest, freshest, and absolute best efforts right from the start. So, to recap our journey through the chapter quickly and clearly, in verses 1 through 3, we covered the raw, uncooked fine flour offering, where the priest burns a memorial handful and keeps the rest for sustenance. In verses 4 through 10, we explored the 3 methods of cooked offerings: the oven, the griddle, and the stewing pan, all of which require unleavened flour and oil. In verses 11 through 13, we learned the strict chemical rules of the altar. There is an absolute prohibition against burning fermenting leaven and decaying honey, sitting right alongside the absolute requirement to include the preserving salt of the covenant. And finally, in verses 14 through 16, we saw the beautiful cyclical offering of the early roasted first fruits. As you reflect on the simple flour, the fragrant incense, and the preserving salt of this ancient text, I want to leave you with this thought. How can you ensure that the daily offerings of your time, your energy, and your relationships are seasoned with the enduring salt of genuine commitment? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.